Tim?
Co-chairs DeLauro and Miller, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my observations on these matters of vital interest to our country. My name is Timothy Judson, and I lead the Workers' Rights Program for Progressive States Network, a national, nonpartisan nonprofit that works with state legislators and advocates to develop and advance progressive legislation in the states. I've been asked to testify today as to the scale of the assault on workers' rights and the middle class and the positive measures states can take, and some are taking, to advance the economic security of working people. This year in particular, we are seeing what must be acknowledged as a full-scale campaign to dismantle the very foundations of America's social and moral progress over the last century. Major anti-labor legislation has been introduced in at least 37 states so far this session, and in 23 states, more than one such piece of legislation is in play. Included in this assessment are bills on the following policies: repeals of collective bargaining rights for public sector employees in 18 states, so-called right-to-work laws in 16 states, repeals of state minimum wage and prevailing wage laws in 18 states, bans on the use of project labor agreements in 12 states, and bills and resolutions preemptively seeking to interfere with implementation of the Employee Free Choice Act in 3 states and a ballot initiative campaign beginning in a 4th. These measures target 2 of the most fundamental components of workers' rights policy in the United States: protections of workers' basic right to organize, and the government's role in establishing and raising wage standards. The scope of efforts to roll back labor standards at the state level is not limited to those types of legislation. There are also efforts to undermine undermine child labor laws, minimum wage rates, overtime protections, family and medical leave, enforcement of wage and hour laws, and several other measures. However, those bills are primarily being introduced in states where major anti-labor legislation is already in play. This assault on workers' rights is not limited to states where Republicans control both the legislature and the governor's office. In fact, these efforts are concentrated in states where Republicans recently increased their control or see opportunities to do so. Of the 22 states where there was a strong shift toward Republican Party control of the government following the 2010 elections, there are now major assaults on workers' rights in all but 3. Of the 13 states where major attacks on workers are not underway, 7 have Republican-controlled state governments, and 10 are already right-to-work states with well-established anti-labor climates. These policies are being advanced for political and ideological reasons, without regard to sound policymaking or the public interest. For instance, a law enacted in Idaho last week is titled Right to Work, even though Idaho is already a right-to-work state, and the bill's actual provisions are to ban project labor agreements and repeal prevailing wage standards. The prevailing wage provision of the bill is also redundant, since Idaho repealed its prevailing wage law nearly 30 years ago, in 1985. In 3 other right-to-work states, legislation has been introduced merely to elevate the profile of the policy. It is apparent that conservatives want to introduce anti-labor measures even where they are redundant in order to amplify what is essentially an ideologically charged shock-and-awe campaign against workers' rights. In many cases, major legislation is being rushed through early in the session with little opportunity for debate. As we've seen, bills to revoke collective bargaining rights for public sector workers have been passed by legislative chambers in Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin after being considered for just days. Idaho enacted its law banning project labor agreements less than 2 months into session and may move equally to strip teachers of their bargaining rights soon. 3 weeks ago, the New Hampshire House of Representatives passed the Right-to-Work bill after considering it for less than a week. On March 1st, the Missouri House of Representatives passed a bill to nullify the minimum wage amendment enacted by voters just 4 years ago. And on February 11th, the Wyoming House Labor Committee also approved a bill to repeal the minimum wage law enacted by voters just 4 years ago. That this is happening now, on the heels of the Great Recession and historic levels of unemployment and economic insecurity, would be ironic if it were not so historically pertinent. The labor standards now being attacked were first advanced nationally during the last comparable economic upheaval. The Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act helped our country emerge from the Great Depression by protecting the fundamental rights of workers and establishing basic principles of fairness and decency that within 20 years had created our legendary middle class and a level of shared economic prosperity and opportunity that had never been seen in the world before. That the peak value of the minimum wage, the height of private sector union membership, and the most balanced distribution of income in our history all occurred within 2 to 3 years of one another demonstrated the success of those policies. Not everyone has forgotten that lesson, and legislation to advance workers' rights and economic security is also moving in several states this year. Those measures do more than take a forward-looking approach to economic recovery. They show a true commitment by elected officials to put the needs of ordinary people first. Progressive States Network has taken the best examples of what states are doing to create a policy platform for that vision. Our blueprint for economic security identifies policies in 4 key areas: building prosperity, job security, health security, and job creation that will shore up working families, get people back to work, and sustain vital public services and infrastructure. Included with my testimony is a copy of the blueprint and a list of legislation in the states to advance policies that comprise it. As a counterpoint, it may help the committee see more clearly the destructive ideological agenda behind the attacks on workers' rights we are experiencing this year. Thank you again for the opportunity to share this information.
Thank you.